Yes, sir.
A very good evening to all of you present in this forum. Creating a culture of well-being in a digital classroom. The facilitator to address on this most apt topic in today's scenario is Mrs. Mona Seervai, who is the head of school at Mount Litera School International. Regarded amongst Mumbai's top educationists, Mrs. Seervai brings with her close to 3 decades of teaching experience, and her pursuits has always to effectively combine academic rigor with a student-centric approach in a nurturing and safe environment to ensure a child's overall emotional, physical, creative, and intellectual development. A passionate teacher, she has also served in an honorary capacity on the IB Asia Pacific Regional Council for Heads from 2014 to 2016 and holds an honorary position on the advisory board of the Indian School Leadership Institute and is an academic advisor to 321 Foundation. She continues to work with the IB as a consultant, workshop leader, and a school visit team leader. An avid learner herself, Mrs. Seervai has been trained under Dr. Lynn Erickson, an authority on the concept-based curriculum design and instruction in 2015, and was the science specialist for the concept-based curriculum and instruction institute in 2016 in Wiesbaden, Germany, and 2017 and 2018 in Haarlem, Netherlands. Mrs. Servai shares her expertise on conceptual learning with other schools in the country and abroad. Mrs. Servai, please take over.
Good evening and welcome everybody. It's so nice to see some familiar faces and some new acquaintances. So I will just quickly share my screen. And I just want to share with you today that I'm just sharing what works for me, what I believe in and what I'm passionate about. And it's really well-being that we're going to talk about today. So as I welcome you, I want to get a sense of the room. How are you feeling today? Some of you are very familiar with using Mentimeter. Those of you who are not, you just have to go to menti.com on another device. And the code is 2606025. We'll put the code on chat. And let's just see how you're feeling today so that I get a sense of the room. So 2606025. And let's go to menti.com and see what we get today. So as you type, I'll get a sense of the room. 2606025. Excited, ready to learn, happy. I'm so happy. That's wonderful. Let's see what the energy comes up with. Very, very happy. Wow, calm, excited, lovely, enthusiastic, great, calm. What wonderful positive emotions, hopeful, grateful. I'm grateful too. Yes, exhausted. It can happen because it has been a very hot day. I just hope at the end of this session you feel a little less exhausted. But I'm so bushwhacked. Oh dear. Okay, let's see how we can deal with being bushwhacked, tired. Okay. But I'm happy to know that a majority of the emotions are positive, and that's really great. So whenever we do an activity, we check in as to why we do this activity because we call this a check-in practice. Now, were I in a hall with all of you, I would be looking at your faces and I would be intuitively seeing what is the mood in the hall today, but I can't do that, right? So that's why I did this on the Mentimeter. And why would we use this in our classrooms? Whether it is the older kids who will type on Mentimeter and tell you exactly how they're feeling like you did today, saying you're bushwhacked, even the littlest ones, the early years. There was a teacher who told me last week that the kids were just feeling so tired and they just said, Miss, can we just talk today? And that's important. It's important to get a sense of the room so that you can then tailor your session to the participants and what they're feeling at that moment. So since most of you are excited and eager to learn, let's just get to it. Uncertainty is nothing new for human beings. Okay, this is a quote from a Native American gathering in Arizona 21 years ago. And the quote says that there is a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel that they're being torn apart and suffer greatly. Know that the river has no destination. The elders say we must push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above the water. See who is in there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we have to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment we do that, our growth comes to a halt. I found this quote and I thought it would be apt to begin with it. And I'd really like to know what you think of the quote. So do post a few responses on chat and tell me how you respond to something like this. We're in a river. We need to keep our head above water. We need to be together and celebrate. And let's not take anything personally. Insightful and thought-provoking. Thank you, Friana. So relevant today in COVID times. Yes, absolutely. And uncertainty is nothing new. We know about the pandemic that happened 100 years ago, but we don't have any records of how human beings interacted, what the feeling was, what they said, what they talked about. Go with the flow, apt for today, and keep going with the flow because the river is moving. And what's wonderful for me with this is that we keep our eyes open and our heads above water and don't take anything personally. Celebrate together, move with the times and go with the flow. So thank you for the responses and great to hear from you. And let's look at this slide, once upon a time. Now, as I was introduced, as having had so many decades of teaching experience, I have taught in classrooms like this with chalk and talk. And I'm sure that many of you, even if you are so much younger than me, would have experienced the chalk and talk in your own classrooms as students. So once upon a time, school looked like this. For many of us, school used to look like this not very long ago. Let me share this screen. Okay, so that I'm sure is a really familiar sight, and that's what school used to look like. And this is what school looks like today. This is what we keep calling the new normal. This is where we have reached. These are our Zoom classes. These are our Zoom meetings. But the river is flowing. This is what school looks like. So what do? We keep our heads above water and we keep going. With this introduction, I want to share the goals for this session. So what I'd really like to do is to explore the culture of schools and classrooms in a digital space, look at how individuals are responsible for maintaining relationships, and let's reflect on messages about well-being schools may have sent in the past. We've already crossed that decade of the brain when we should have and ought to have looked at well-being, but suddenly there is an opportunity today, messages being sent presently and new messages we can develop in these uncertain times. So these are my goals. I hope they synchronize with your goals. So let's first look at the purpose and promise of school as a large concept, as a large idea, and uncover your story. What is culture? Culture is a group of people enacting stories, said Daniel Quinn. And we've all heard of Ron Richard, who has created Cultures of Thinking at Project Zero. And he adapted this to say that the culture of schools as a group of people enacting a story. The story concerns the relationship between teachers, students, and the act of learning. Everyone is a player in this story, enacting in a way that reinforces the story and makes it reality. So what does this mean? I'd like everybody to do a very short personal reflection, and I'm going to put up some prompts. Think about what is the story of learning we knew when we were physically present in school. What were the messages about learning, schooling? How do they differ from the messages we are sending our students about learning today in this environment? What if we know what our messages were when we were there? No, it's all about the hugging and the joy, seeing those happy spaces. But what if, even in the digital space, instead of shaping kids to fit into our system, we structured the system to fit the kids? Schools measured success not by what individuals did on assessments, but by what groups were able to accomplish together. By groups over here, let's be more inclusive and have our groups as teachers, the parents, the collaboration, community groups, and not only groups of children. What if schools took the development of students' intellectual character as their highest calling? Understanding and application of skills and knowledge rather than acquisition of knowledge were the goal. So understanding and application, we don't know what the future is going to look like. We never imagined as students or as teachers that school would ever look like the way it looks today, that Zoom mat that I showed you earlier. So understanding and application rather than acquisition can be a goal. And how do we engage students in learning rather than them being compliant in the process of school as it is done to them? We can do it to them whether we are online or whether we are offline. But how do we engage students? And how do we give them more control of their learning? Looking at this, what if? What are some messages in the digital space? What if? What if we all went back to school a day as a student? What if? Would our ways change? What would we want in this space? Can we imagine and post a 6-word story of what it would feel like to be at the other end of our own digital classroom? 6-word stories were first started with Ernest Hemingway. And I made my little 6-word story. Listen, miss, I need to talk. So what if we go back to menti.com and we use the same code and we post our 6-word story on what our school would look like? So I'm just going to move to the next slide so that you can then post your 6-word story of a digital school. And I'm doing this so that I can just see what you're thinking. What I'm thinking is that, yeah, everybody just wants to talk. What if? Be quiet and wait. Please switch on your cameras. Yes, absolutely. They're in their pajamas lying around. That's what digital. I go to the loo. Lovely. Sending you a big virtual hug. I love that. That's what everybody needs. A virtual hug. Don't know when we will hug physically again. Yes, thank you. I send you back a big virtual hug. When can we come to school? Be grateful for what I have. I will be more of myself, waiting to see you all, friends. Let's do a high five on that. Absolutely lovely. These are some of the messages that we would want to hear Were we at the other end of the camera? Can I eat some breakfast? When can we have virtual detox or digital detox? Perfect. So really, all these messages, if I have to club them, some of them are looking at having some physical breaks or just having some physical acknowledgement. And some of them are looking at wanting to build relationships. So I'm going to try and go into the second part, that is building the relationships. And thank you all for sharing. And we will continue to look at the mentee posts as we go along. So when we look at what relationships are built on, let's look at what well-being is. And let's first look at the 5 domains of well-being. So if we look at this diagram, which came from the New South Wales Department of Education and Communities, with well-being in the center, you have the social well-being. I so remember so many kids I've taught saying, Miss, we come to school to meet our friends. The emotional well-being, to be happy. Cognitive, yes, we want the academic learning. Don't shy away from spiritual, because spiritual has nothing to do with religion. Spiritual is secular. And finally, the 5 domains of well-being are the physical well-being. But what's happened now? It's gone. And it's been replaced with the virtual domain. But let's just look at well-being in the virtual domain as well. And it's difficult to define. And there are different definitions in relation to health, education, psychology, and philosophy, to name just a few. So the clinical or health perspective defines well-being as the absence of negative conditions. The psychological perspective looks at it as the prevalence of positive attributes. But a useful working definition may be to see well-being as that balance point between an individual's resource pool and the challenges faced. Remember the river, that balance, keep our head above water, keep flowing and celebrating. So well-being is really a sustainable state of positive mood and attitude, resilience and satisfaction with self. I'm going to look at resilience a little more later on. Relationships and experiences at school. So our 6-word story was all about relationships, and therefore we're all about well-being. Let's compare what is well-being and what is welfare. While we do need welfare for well-being, welfare on the right-hand side of my screen operates from the basis of student need. It does not always take the whole child view. But well-being is for all students, and it goes beyond welfare. Yes, we have to look after welfare. Yes, people need to be comfortable. They need to be well-fed. They need to have nice chairs to sit on, and they need to feel safe and secure. But well-being talks about an aim for all students to be healthy, happy, successful, and productive. Whereas welfare very often looks at a deficit model. If there is a negative behavior, well, what will I do in order to bring a break onto that negative behavior or replace it with something else? So while we do need welfare for well-being, the two are very, very different. And let's not confuse the two. So when we talk about well-being, it's very common to talk about social emotional learning. And there was a survey in 2018 which asked whether social emotional learning is as important as academic learning. As you can imagine, 96% of administrators and 93% of teachers said yes. 81% of the parents said yes. Because perhaps now, if we were to take this survey again in COVID times, my hunch is that this number will increase. So yes, social emotional learning is as important as academic learning. And for that, I would rather show you this film than talk myself.
When a child is born, we do everything we can to protect them, nurture them, love them. A child's heart and mind are fragile. As they grow, we want to teach them everything we know. We send them to school to fill their minds with wonderful knowledge, to give them the tools they need for life. At school, they get a taste of what things are like in the world outside. There is friendship, romance, disappointment, embarrassment, discrimination, and bullying. But are the tools we give them enough to prepare them for this world? We have an enormous responsibility and an amazing opportunity. If we truly want to prepare them for the world outside, we must also educate the heart. Because to navigate the world outside with compassion, acceptance, and tolerance, we need to teach them compassion, acceptance, and tolerance. This can begin in our schools, and it can start today. It can happen at hockey practice, dance class, at day camps, and music lessons. And it's already happening around the world with astonishing results. If we want our children to grow into socially and emotionally capable young people, we must ask for a balanced education that puts importance on educating both the mind and the heart.
So having seen that, I love this phrase, educating the heart, because that can help create caring, just, inclusive, and healthy communities that support all students in reaching their fullest potential. So while we educate the heart at hockey practice, in the playground, we can also educate the heart in a digital environment, because our heart is still beating even when we are virtually connected. At this point, I will pause, reflect, rewind. If there are any questions, if anybody from the ABEA team can pose them, or I will move on if there are no questions. If there are questions, reflections, I just thought this would be a good point to pause. And any comments or questions, please post on chat.
Anybody who would like to ask a question, now is the time. We will take questions at the end also once more. So don't hesitate. If you have a question, do type it out in the chat box. Ma'am, we have a comment on Facebook about the video that you just showed, and somebody has said that it's such a wonderful video and she's really liked it. So somebody's actually commented on that.
Great. Happy to share the link. It's available, and it's one of those things that is nice to see. Okay, great. I thought at this point I could stop and take questions, because we talked about the why, and I'm going to move into the next part, which is about the how. 1 minute, I just see something over here. Yeah, beautiful video. Thank you. Okay, so the first group that actually talked about academic, social, and emotional learning is called CASEL. And they have a lot of resources, and they created this structure for how to develop social and emotional learning in schools. So the two orange segments refer to the personal skills that we need, namely self-awareness and self-management. And the green part refer to social awareness and relationship skills. And the yellow part, which is that is the relationship building, the social skills. But we are also part of a system. And so we need responsible decision making, and that comes in the yellow piece. Now, CASEL gives you a lot of theoretical information, but there is no curriculum framework. So for the last year and a half, I have been looking at the C learning framework, which is the social, emotional, ethical learning framework. And I'll talk a little bit more and in more detail about this framework, but I wanted to juxtapose the two frameworks together. So while Castle talks about the orange, the green, and the yellow as being the personal, the social, and the systems, so does the C-learning framework. So if you look at the outer circle, those are the domains that we talk about. So we have the personal domain, we have the systems domain, and we have the social domain. However, the dimensions are a little different because the dimensions are based in a feeling, passion, or empathy, or warm-heartedness. And so the dimensions in C-learning curriculum are the awareness that I need to know about myself in all the domains. I need to be aware of my personal capabilities, my social, and my systems. And I need to have the compassion to act on my awareness through the engagement. So very, very simply, the awareness is the head or the investigation, the compassion is the heart, and the engagement are the hands. All these together all intersect. We can never divide it. They're all gray borders that come together and they all work together as one whole. This curriculum was launched in April 2019 in Delhi through His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who really believes that the world can benefit, and we know how many talks he has given. And there's so many people who talk about the pillars for social, emotional, and ethical learning. And he has given his blessing to this curriculum, which is global as well as in India. So let's look at what this curriculum is looking at. Take a quote. Desmond Tutu said, educating the mind without educating the heart has led to brilliant scientists who use their intelligence for evil. We know that. We've seen. Can you imagine having a brilliant scientist without empathy or compassion? Think about the future and all the problems we need to deal with yet. Post-COVID-19, we're talking about digital spaces. Once we come back into that physical space, it's not going to be the same as it was. And we're going to have to cope with the well-being and cope with all the kids whom we love and our colleagues very, very differently. So we need our future generations not only to be those brilliant, creative people who solve our problems, but they have to do so with compassion and think about how their new creations will impact society. So the C-learning framework, or the social, emotional, ethical learning framework, and I was very interested in the word ethical that got added, because ethical does not just relate to society ethics and greater common good, but I'm also ethical to myself, as in yoga with the yamas that we follow, and also ethical in my relationship with others. And so this framework is grounded in the principle of compassion. So what is compassion? It's a desire to alleviate the distress or adversity of others, arising from sensitivity to their challenges and rooted in warm-heartedness. The Dalai Lama loves this phrase as warm-heartedness. Anybody who has seen him, he's just so warm-hearted. He has such a lovely, infectious laugh. And compassion goes beyond empathy. Yes, empathy is also understanding what it feels like to be in somebody else's shoes. But empathy need not always result in some action. Empathy need not be actually being motivated to do something about it. We can have empathy in order to manipulate people as well. But compassion has its root in warm-heartedness and affection. And so compassion is like a motivational empathy. It goes beyond empathy. It has the desire to do something. We can't all be going out and being activists and doing, there is also a time and age for it. We may not be physically able to do it now. We may not be there. But even just having the compassion for those who connect to us is very, very vital and very, very important. And it doesn't have to be for the most disadvantaged groups. We have compassion for each other, compassion for our students. So the model that e-learning uses has three steps, three levels. Yes, there is content, and the content is on the level on the top, which is the received knowledge. And so, yes, there will be some content that we will have in the classroom through the curriculum. But content is not just enough. There will be an activity like we did a check-in, but it's not just enough to do a check-in. When we do that activity, what is the critical insight that we get? And we call these our aha moments. I'm experiencing something. What does it mean to me? How do I make it visible to myself? And finally, how does it become part of my DNA? When does it become embodied understanding? So when does that knowledge become internalized so that it's transformative and spontaneous? These are the levels that we follow. I'm going to go through a very short example, and perhaps if we have time, show you a couple of short video clips so that we understand how C-learning can work in creating compassion, even in the digital world. So let's look at a learning engagement. What is my learning engagement going to focus on? The fact that we need resilient and adaptive individuals for rapidly changing environments, and it's becoming increasingly important. So that's my content basis. Let's first understand what is the resilient zone. Like I talked about well-being, the zone is a state of well-being in mind, body, and spirit. So when we are in the resilient zone, one is able to handle the stresses of life. For kids, we sometimes call it the okay zone. But that doesn't mean that we don't get annoyed or we don't get angry, but we don't lose our head within the resilient zone. We can go up and down, we can be sad, but we don't have to feel like we are washed away by the river of sorrows. And we're okay. So within that okay zone, we can have a few bumpy rides. But what happens when there's a trigger? If there's a traumatic or a stressful event, or if there's a traumatic trigger, I get bumped out of the resilient zone. And if I get bumped up, then I can become edgy, irritable, or have angry outbursts and pain. If I get bumped down, I get depressed. I feel sad and isolated. I'm exhausted and I'm numb. And that's when I get bumped out. And it happens to everybody. We all get bumped out of our resilient zone. How do we get bumped out? Let's look at this example and let's see that the fist is a metaphor for the brain. So imagine that here you have the amygdala, which controls or which looks after the emotional responses. And then here my four fingers are what are called the prefrontal cortex, or what this diagram calls the wise leader. The prefrontal cortex is when we are in control. We're able to control what we are doing. We are within our resilient zone. But what happens when there is a trigger? The phrase that we use is you flip your lid. So we flip our lid. And the prefrontal cortex is no longer in control. So the amygdala comes into play. That's my thumb over here. And this is the alarm center. And so here I've lost control. I'm no longer in control. I flipped my lid. So I'm acting on instinct. There's anger, there's fear, there's anxiety. That is controlled by the amygdala. And what happens when we get bumped out? We either fight, that is we react, or there's flight, we run away, or we freeze. This has happened to many of us when we get bumped out of a resilient zone. How do we stay within the resilient zone? There are some strategies that we can use. The first step is being aware, and meta-awareness is what we talk about. So I first need to be aware that I'm being bumped out of the resilient zone, and then I recall some strategies to get back. Of course, different strategies may work for different individuals. So one particular strategy is called grounding. We use it a lot in yoga when we ground, and grounding is noticing the physical contact our body has with things, including things we touch or how we're standing or sitting. We also ground with the breath, because the breath is our constant in our body. And we can ground with our breath by noticing where we notice it. Or with very little children, they can ground with the breath by lying down, putting a stuffed toy on the stomach, and watching the stuffed toy bump up and down. This is one particular strategy that we can use. Another strategy is called resourcing. And that's bringing to mind a resource which helps us feel safe and comfort. A resource can be a hug that we recall, can be being in nature, the smells, the sounds. It can be feeling more safe and secure. It can be a person. It can be a religious figure. It can be a deity. It can be white light. A resource can be real. A resource can be imagined. And when we resource, we also track the sensations in our body when we are resourcing. And so for some people, grounding works. For some people, resourcing works. And that's fine. The key is practice. If we practice these strategies when we are in our resilient zone, they help us come back to the resilient zone when we are bumped out more easily. I'm very, very quickly just going to show you some responses where children have talked about the high or the low zone. They get bumped out. So this was a class we did just a few minutes of sharing. You get bumped into your high zone where you get angry and you get hyper and you're like, oh, I want to do something about it. Yeah. So I'm going to come back and take some responses on, you've understood your okay zone, you've understood your low zone and your high zone. And anybody wants to give an example of a low zone or a high zone or even a...
I have an example for high zone.
Yeah. Tell me.
So when you feel angry or you feel something in the heart, when you like crushing something, I always hold a paper and start. I always take a pillow and start punching.
Yeah, that's a good strategy. Thank you, Trisha, for sharing.
When I'm in my high zone, I tend to basically break things a lot.
You tend to what a lot, Shukari?
I tend to break things a lot.
Oh, okay. Let's try and find this like Trisha to maybe crush a paper rather than actually doing something destructive. Does anybody get into the low zone? Trisha again? Yeah? What happened?
Sometimes, yes, when I'm really irritated.
Irritated would be the high zone. I sometimes feel sad. Okay, so that was just a little glimpse of Sea Learning that happened in March. They're all in grade 4. And we talked about this and then we learned a few other strategies called Help Now strategies to help the kids stay within their resilient zone when they get bumped out. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to put up something to remember and see if we can take questions. So connections may not develop if grown in isolation. We are all social beings and we need to connect with one another in order to have connections. Two human beings build a connection by sharing stories of their hopes and fears. And a relationship builds on meaning rather than appearance. And we know that. We know that now. Character versus characteristics. Or as Ron Richard said, dispositions versus characteristics. So how do we build grit? How do we build character? How do we keep a growth mindset? And most important, play, lighten the mood so that you can deepen the conversation. Let's not be so serious. We used to play when we were in the classroom. We walked up and down and we really reached out to the kids. We smiled. Let's lighten the mood and deepen all our conversations. As I come to the end, I'd really like to read you this poem, which is called Clearing by Martha Postlethwaite. Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is your life falls into your own cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue. Let us keep our heads above water let us continue floating, and let us make our clearing so that the world which needs rescue is actually rescued. For me, my first mentor in well-being, and so many of you from JB know that Miss Shirin Dalasha really guided us and ensured that no matter what we did, we looked after our students. And for her, this, I am indebted for life. And every time I think about well-being, or even as I work in an IB school, I just think how forward-thinking you were, Miss Shirin, and how you guided so many of us, and you live in our hearts. So I always dedicate this presentation to you and all that you have taught me at JB. My acknowledgements are Project Zero, the New South Wales Department, idio.com, CASEL, C-Learning at Emory, and C-Learning India, both of whom have been such a support to all of us. And at my present school, 5 of us who call ourselves the C Pioneers. And with that, I have come to the end of my 45-minute talk. So a digital thank you. I could give all of you a virtual hug, but this is the best that we can do in this space. So thank you so much for being there with us today. And we have 50 minutes for questions or responses or comments. So many familiar faces.
Ma'am, I think the session was great, and I was one of the people who actually wrote, I'm tired today, but I genuinely feel better at the end of 45 minutes. So can I start with the questions? I can see one that had come in earlier. It's from Shivani. She says, how to capture and retain hearts in order to ensure retention of education?
By being who you are, be authentic. You will only capture a heart with your own heart. And the only way you can do it is with your own warm-heartedness and your authenticity. You can't fake it. You cannot fake it. And believe you me, you will capture your heart with your actions and not with your words. You can say something, but unless it comes from inside, believe you me, you can start sensing the pulse of a Zoom class. It's really silly, but I sometimes wonder, but you can tell that attention is flagging or something is going forward. Open your heart and you'll capture all the hearts you want. Heart's a huge space. Don't worry. There's enough space for everybody.
Does anybody have a question? If they would like to unmute themselves and ask the question, we have time for that as well. So please just raise your hands and we will unmute you. Okay, so Sucheta says, how to guide the young minds towards the heart and soul in the present academic scenario where marks play a very big role.
Yeah, I know that. And that is like a struggle, but the marks take care of themselves. Believe me, the marks will take care of themselves. It's really practice. First, number one, believe. You need to believe that this is going to change. You also need to believe in a teacher. For me, this lockdown period has really not been as stressful as I would have anticipated because of personal practice. And my personal practice has kept me whole and sane. And yes, that doesn't mean that you don't get bumped. You do get bumped, but you first need to believe, invest in yourself. Unless your reservoir is full, how can you give? You cannot give. So fill yourself and then move on. Yeah.
We have a lot more questions that have come in. So there's Dr. Sunita Vadikar who is asking, what is educating our heart?
Okay, so it's like integrating social emotional learning into every aspect of the curriculum. It cannot be something that the counselor does or that the yoga teacher does or that happens by the way. I used to sometimes really wonder where you pass by some classrooms and then there are teachers who've had a bad day. You know what? Be honest that you had a bad day, share it with the kids and just let that classroom flow rather than try and take it out on the kids. Be authentic, be emotional, start with yourself. I can share the link for the C-Learning curriculum, and you can start with that and you can look at it. So what it is I'm putting it on the chat. It's clearning.emory.edu. If you go to the website, there's a G on that C-Learning. You go through like a couple of hours. It's called C-Learning 101. Just go through that and start reflecting on yourself. Start seeing when you get bumped out of the resilience zone. Start being compassionate towards everybody. Start feeling a bit more connected across. And then after that, you can download the curriculum. And I think it's very important to go through this 101 and then download the curriculum. Once you download the curriculum, please use it. There's absolutely no cost involved in it. And if you want anybody, you can always reach out to me and we'll be very happy to support you, because this has made a very big difference. It's made a difference to my life, number one, and made a difference to the lives of those whom I teach. It goes across from age 3 right up to the IB 18-year-olds. And it's grade 10 who say, Miss, we need to have more sessions like this. And then you know that something's going out to them. Although in the beginning, they're like, what is all this? We don't need this. But they do realize the value. So that's where it's C-Learning. Yeah. We all need to educate that and to educate minds. Yeah, it's really a good takeaway. And so I have.
I'll go to the next question, ma'am.
C-Learning. So Aruna, I'm sorry, I wasn't wearing my glasses. It's C-Learning Emory. Yeah. So
we have an anonymous question, ma'am.
Yeah.
There is a teacher who says that as a teacher teaching in a school which has no SEL framework, are there any strategies that I can use in my classroom?
Absolutely. In your class. So I don't know what subject you teach, but whatever subject you teach, whether it's science or it's math or it's, any subject, you model it. So look at the pedagogical model, right? I mean, where does it start? It starts with received knowledge. I'm so dying to get my content, but how do I give my content? I'm trying to ram it down the throat. The content will happen. Whether you're teaching chemistry or math or social studies, the content will happen. Then give the kids some time to get their own insight, but you embody it. You embody the warm-heartedness. You feel compassion. If there's a day in which the kids are not feeling like like listening to you drone on or chemistry, ask them how they're feeling. Push back and look at them. See what they're feeling. Respond to them as human beings. And just follow it for yourself, and it will reflect. When we used to do this in JV, we had no framework. We literally had a principal who said that the children are important, and the first thing that matters, I can see some nodding faces, that the children matter the most. And she said, you have to teach them to be appreciative and empathetic. There were certain things she rammed down our nose. I'll never forget how one silly class smashed cake on each other on a particular birthday, and she yelled at all of us teachers and said, take them and show them what the world is, show them the disaster and the distress in the world. And we were all scrambling, no Christmas parties, going to, street kids' homes and shelters and so on and so forth. But it was a heart. These are all just external manifestations. She dealt with the heart. When she had equivalent of Founders Day, every single kid got a handwritten note. And, it came from her heart. Let your heart flow. You don't need anything else. I have somebody who's raised her hand. I have Kamal Kant Sharma who's here.
I'm just going to ask him to unmute. Kamal Sharma, if you can just unmute and ask your question, please.
Oh, big virtual hugs to everybody whom I can see. Thank you for being here.
Ma'am, I think till he comes online, I have another question here from Nikki.
Yeah.
What if someone is not ready to connect at all? How can we help them get to their resilient state?
Okay, someone. So let's first look at who the someone is. Okay, is the someone a child? Is the someone a teacher? Is the someone a parent? Please let me tell you, if you are authentic, everybody will ultimately come. People, we are all human beings. We all want to connect. It's when we are trying to be prescriptive or do a tick mark or follow something, it's not going to happen. You have to try different strategies. And it's not a strategy from a book. It's a strategy that comes intuitively. Change, see how it works. And ultimately, I'm sure that everybody will connect. It's impossible that it doesn't happen. Yeah, I have many of my friends who are logging out for you. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I have another anonymous question actually. What should we do when children don't want to give up their thoughts and their side of, their perspective actually, and refuse to look at the other side?
Listen, I'm going to flip that. I'm really going to flip that. As a teacher, are you refusing to listen to their perspective? Listen, everybody has something to say. So if it becomes like this log jam where you feel like they are not listening to your perspective, step back. Are you not listening to their perspective? And is that why you're getting this absolute log jam? It can't happen. It can't happen because that's how we begin. We begin with every perspective is valid. Everybody is valid. And everybody is really. How do we reach the students with helicopter parents or snow plowing parents? And it's become even more difficult with the helicopter parents. So sometimes, you know what? I'm going to say something that someone told me about 15 years ago. And she was like, sometimes for the parents and the adults, throw phrases, throw concepts, throw these important things. Oh, you know what? We're doing social emotional well-being, or something like that. Yeah, just throw those words at adults because adults have actually built the Great Wall of China and they are not ready to listen. So throw some, how should I say, flavor of the month words and see how you can win them over on that. But yeah, very, very difficult. Thank you. Thank you all. And sorry for putting in the wrong website, but Anuradha corrected that.
Any more questions, Lata, we have on Facebook or any other place?
None yet. None on Facebook yet.
Okay.
But I have a comment on Facebook from Miss Shalini John who says that it's always nice to listen and learn from you, Miss Mona.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can wrap the session, Mrs. Seervai and Lata?
Yeah. I think we've done well on time. That's
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
So yes, you please go ahead. I'm just going to be wrapping up. So you wanted to say something.
Yeah, what I wanted to just say was what we tell the kids, when they give these black boxes with their names, say, okay, now we're done. So turn your cameras on, say bye and leave.
No, absolutely. I think everybody needs to just turn their cameras on and see some
bye and exit. Yeah. So lovely seeing all of you. Thank you all.
Absolutely. I think one thing I learned is be authentic. And I say be authentic is just to hear Mrs. Seervai's voice here again was something so wonderful here. And those same little, gems, precious gems that one takes away every time one here is what I will take back from here. Somebody has just written to me on a private chat. It's so refreshing to see someone actually talk about things that are even more important today than they were a year before. And I think that really sums up your entire session. And just to talk about those little sweet notes that you give to your students, I can't forget those little notes. As a principal, Mrs. Seervai gave to every teacher on New Year. She made it a point to give it on the 19th or the 20th of December when we would part ways for the Christmas leave, those little handwritten notes for every occasion that she had, and for entire staff, not just for one teacher, two teacher, but maybe the 100 teachers that worked with her. I think she had sweet little personalized notes, and some of them which I still treasure. I think these are little things that make a difference. Being authentic, being your true self. And she truly walks the talk, I must say so, of what she does.
Now, I think Chandrani wants to say something. I was just looking at the chat. Chandrani, did you want to unmute and say something?
Yes, Ms. Seervai, I was listening to your session and I was just feeling how lucky we are to have you. You know, it's amazing. You know, it's like the more I hear you, I feel like I'm still learning, yet to reach. So it was really amazing to hear you. And I'm hoping all those sessions I will be attending, whatever session you have. It was really nice. And I was really feeling blessed that we are working at the same, you know, organization, and you are my principal. And I'm really, really lucky to have you.
Thank
It's
you.
really
We're lucky
amazing.
to have everybody, and we're lucky to have everyone who we have worked with. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Yeah.
Thank you everyone for logging on.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye. Thank you.